Right now, there's probably a face somewhere in the room with you, not a person. Maybe it is the two screws and slot of an outlet, the knobs on a cabinet, or the dark windows of a speaker. The face is not real, but try making it disappear. You can identify the object, count its parts, and still feel its expression staring back. That is the strange part. Your brain can know there is no face and keep seeing one anyway. This is called face pareidolia. It is often described as a funny mistake, as if imagination arrives late and doodles a face over whatever you were looking at. But the face may arrive first. Before the rest of your visual system has finished identifying the object, a fast face detection process has already raised its hand. All it needs is a rough arrangement. Two similar shapes high up, one shape lower down, and something that holds them together. The pieces do not have to resemble actual eyes or an actual mouth. Headlights and a grille will do. So will two windows over a door. Once the arrangement crosses the threshold, the car is angry, the house is surprised, and the outlet has just heard terrible news. You do not confuse any of them with a person. You see the face and the object at the same time. That sounds impossible until the first quarter of a second is slowed down. In 2020, a team led by neuroscientist Susan Wardle showed people three kinds of images while recording their brain activity. There were real human faces, ordinary objects, and objects containing illusory faces. Each illusory face object had a closely matched version, with the face-like arrangement removed. The first useful differences in the brain signals appeared around 130 milliseconds after an image arrived. At roughly 160 milliseconds, the response to an illusory face peaked at almost the same moment as the early response that separated real faces from objects. At that point, the face-like objects were represented more like faces than their matched objects were. Then the race changed. By about 260 milliseconds, the illusory faces had moved back toward the ordinary objects in the pattern of brain activity. The visual system had not been fooled for seconds while somebody reasoned through the image. It had made a rapid face-like interpretation and begun correcting it in less than a quarter of a second. That is why the outlet can flicker between two identities without ever becoming confusing. One part of perception has found a socially important pattern. The rest has correctly identified plastic, screws, and sockets. The correction wins, but it does not delete the first impression. You know what the object is. You still see who it appears to be. And somehow, it is never just a blank face. Look at the front of a car, and it may seem aggressive. A bent mailbox can look exhausted. A sink may appear to be staring toward the soap. There is no eye, no muscle, and no mind inside any of them. Yet the visual system begins extracting the same kinds of information that matter in a real social encounter. Researchers Colin Palmer and Colin Clifford tested this with gaze. They selected objects whose face-like features seemed to look left or right. People stared repeatedly at those objects, then judged where real human faces were looking. Exposure to the fake gaze systematically shifted the gaze people perceived in the real faces. When the researchers removed the features that made the objects look like faces, the effect became much smaller. The sink was not merely reminding people of a face. For a moment, it was reaching into machinery used to judge another person's attention. Expression goes through the gate, too. In another experiment, people reliably agreed that very different illusory faces looked happy or angry. Their judgment of one object's expression was even pulled slightly toward the expression they had just seen, a carryover effect also found with human faces. This explains why adding two dots to almost anything feels like giving it a tiny inner life. The face detector does not stop after announcing three shapes. It opens the door to systems built to ask where someone is looking and how they might feel. A toaster does not need emotions for you to read them, but the shapes on the object are only half of the trick. The other half is what you expected to find. In one fMRI experiment, 20 people looked at hundreds of gray images made entirely from overlapping blobs of visual noise. During one task, they were told that half the images contained faces that would be extremely hard to detect. During another, they searched the same noise for hidden letters. There were no faces and no letters in the test images. Even so, participants reported seeing a face in about 34% of the face search trials. They reported a letter in about 38% of the letter search trials. When the researchers averaged the noise patterns that had produced each kind of report, one result contained a faint face-like structure, and the other contained a letter-like structure. The eyes received the same images. The search changed what counted as evidence. This does not mean expectation can turn absolutely anything into a face. Most random arrangements still look random, and a convincing illusory face usually offers the right geometry. It means ambiguous input gets negotiated from both directions. Features in the image make a face plausible. Memory and expectation decide how eagerly the system tests that possibility. Faces receive an unusually generous test. The obvious reason is that a face carries a ridiculous amount of useful information. It can tell you who is present, where their attention is aimed, whether they recognize you, and whether the next few seconds are likely to be friendly. A system that waits for perfect evidence would be accurate and late. That leads to a tempting evolutionary explanation. Missing a real face hidden in the environment could matter more than briefly finding one in a rock. A detector tuned for sensitivity would accept some false alarms in exchange for fewer costly misses. Pareidolia would be the harmless receipt left by that trade. It is a sensible story, but it is not a fossil record of what happened inside an ancestor's visual system. The evidence is more careful. Rhesus macaque also respond to face-like objects in ways that suggest pareidolia, so the tendency is not simply something humans learned from cartoons or social media. Very young infants are drawn toward face-relevant patterns. Scientists still debate how much comes from an inborn face template, simpler preferences for top-heavy, high-contrast shapes, and the flood of faces seen after birth. Whatever mixture built the system, it is trained early and used constantly. That makes the illusion useful to people who design the objects around you. Put two headlights over an air intake, and a car acquires a personality. Change the angle and width, and it can shift from cheerful to dominant. In product studies, face-like expressions changed which objects people expected to notice or explore. Happy-looking products also received higher purchase intention ratings than angry or surprised ones. The object has not changed what it does. Its accidental social life has changed how it feels. Now look around the room again. The outlet may still be alarmed. A chair back may be grinning. A bag may have sleepy eyes above a zipper mouth. Once the arrangement is found, it can be difficult to return to a world made only of parts. That is not because your brain failed to see reality. It is because seeing reality was never a single finished picture. In the first fraction of a second, different systems test useful interpretations. They weigh the shapes in front of you against patterns learned across a lifetime. Most guesses vanish before you notice them. A face is important enough that its first draft sometimes survives beside the correction. So the face in the wall is not really in the wall, but it is not merely a joke pasted on afterward either. It is a brief, automatic social reading of screws in empty space, still visible even while you know better. The room did not suddenly fill with faces. It was always full of ambiguous patterns. Your brain arrived carrying the cast.